Hello and welcome to the Men's Movement Podcast. I am your host, Vince Casey. This is a podcast where we explore the rising culture in men's healing and interview top thought leaders about the positive shift occurring in the masculine consciousness. The Men's Movement Podcast is in partnership with the Brotherhood of Cascadia. Brotherhood of Cascadia, connecting men to their hearts. Our guest today is Hunter Toran. Hunter is a somatic healer, a facilitator of men's work with the Sacred Sons and Brotherhood of Cascadia, and a keeper of the Hawthornberry. Hunter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Hello, Brother Vince. It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's most alive for you today? I know you just got done with the EMX in Washington. What was the vibe like there?
Yeah. It was very, very ceremonial. There was a deep sharing that was happening across cultures throughout the whole time. You know, Brother Kale from Maui was there. Bryce was up from Portland. There was just a wonderful sharing of culture, of ideas, of ways of being within the so-called work from a ceremonial perspective, and the possibilities that can emerge within or on this stage, as I like to say, within this theater of men's work, so-called. And what's most alive for me is the responsibility to continue to grow within the work on a personal level, and also to see that we don't get stuck within the ease of our own successes and continue to delve deeper into this question of what has become of man. Yeah, brother.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. When I first went to an event with Sacred Sons and I heard the phrase Grand Rising Brothers, I was like, oh, that's such a beautiful way to say that. It's such a poetic term. And I want all of my life to be a new poetic term every day. And now, I've probably heard that phrase Grand Rising like 30,000 times now. And I want to keep finding the new expression, the new edge, the new leading thought. And I hope we continue to do that as brothers.
Yeah, that's really what we've been talking about a lot. Those that I'm closest with is thinking less and less that this is a movement, but more that it's a culture. So things like language, and yeah, Grand Rising's been used to the point where now it's parodied. We're seeing that swing in the comedic shift of beginning to, parody men's work, festival life, which I'm not a part of, but a lot of this kind of advanced consciousness awareness type culture is starting to be parodied a little. And so things like Grand Rising, it's like, it's a beautiful thing because we rise, and people don't understand that when we are together, we greet the sun, we sing the sun into the sky. We begin at that point in the day. We allow ourselves that time to move with the rhythms of the elemental life. And we also, I like to say good morning, because in the work, people say like, oh, what are you mourning for? Like, is it a funeral? And I'm like, yeah, it is actually. That's what we're here to do, is to conduct a funeral for the aspects and the men gather that need to die, the ways that need to die, and also the amount of suffering worldwide. Can we have a good mourning? Can we come into grief in a way that creates lasting shifts for individuals, their families, and communities, and spreads out globally, in a broader sense as well. But always starting there in the culture, in looking at the words that we use. This is a big part of what we talk about in spirit ecology in the Hawthorne way. Myself and Brother Kale, especially. So yeah, it's a good thing to be building a new culture with the right questions, right? How do we build culture without the right questions? And so that's why I like coming and sitting with brothers like yourself who are asking questions. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always curious about you. You kind of come across to some of the brothers as maybe an etherical character. I'm not sure if it's etherical or if you are just maybe decolonizing in a way that's not relatable or transferable sometimes, but I'm going to have a lot of fun picking your brain, and I'm super curious.
Yeah, etherical. For sure I'm etherical, as is everyone. Has the ethereal is the fifth element. People would like to, in the mechanized way, there's only four elements, but the fifth is the ethereal, which is the idea, the inflowing of streams, that which comes in and organizes like a mold for a candle being poured, uh, you know, with wax. So, and I'm also ethereal, and then I'm a song carrier, which is an ethereal act to move through the invisible, through the ethereal with ideas in order uh, to shape thinking and feeling with culture. And you know, I do realize that I'm mysterious to many, and so much of, you mentioned decolonization, and we don't use that term really. We use re-indigenization, or coming back into belonging, because that's what it means to be indigenous, is to come into belonging. And I've certainly been working on that, and realizing that we need to belong in our belonging. Time
Mm.
wise, we need to move in a much longer way than the society propels us towards. And it can cultivate mystery, because it is towards the mystery that we walk if we have any kind of awareness whatsoever here, that there's always an unknown, and that we need a relationship with the unknown. And so I have pursued that. So, you know, no apologies for the discomfort I cause out there, but I think, I'm finding a good way with this, within the drama of what is men's work. And by drama, I mean we have the opportunity to create mystery plays, or ceremonies that bring people to the root of themselves, the design of themselves, and what is in the way of them understanding who they are. So we try and belong in our belonging, stay on this long, long road, uh, and stay at a good pace on it. So there's a good example of me talking in metaphors and poems, maybe too long. So I'll pass it back to you.
Well, speaking of the etherical, I missed this last event. I was kind of getting over some illness, and I had a little bit of FOMO, uh, of fear of missing out after Riverstone left with one of my friends. But I really regretted not being there. Whenever I saw the pictures coming back of the aurora borealis, was visible at the event. What was that like to see the lights hovering above the Salish Sea?
Yeah. Well, it felt like a blessing, you know. We were in the middle of a death ceremony
Mm-hmm.
that we call the Road of Life. And, you've done Brother Death with us, and we've adapted that to something new, you know. And to partake in the wonders of nature in that way, to be in the midst of ceremony, and to have such a dramatic expression of the artistic creation come forward is, more than words can express, really. And each man takes his own meaning from it, and I take my own. um, but it felt like a cooperative sharing with the broader cosmos. um, And it's kind of one of those things, it's like, you keep talking about your FOMO, missing the event, but it's one of those things you had to be there,
Mm-hmm.
right? None that were gathered will forget that night. None that were present anyway. And so it felt like a great gift
Mm-hmm.
to see the wonder unfold in tandem with our actions, our strivings. For us, it's the ancestors giving us approval to the work we're doing, that we're getting recognition, that we're moving in the right direction with what we're doing. Um, these are the things that we look to, wonders and signs. And in a culture, we have to be so careful with such things, that we don't overextend our own meaning into things in order to cultivate power for ourselves. So how do we remain a witness in the wonder of it, and also the mythology that will grow, the the street legends,
Yeah.
brother death waiting with the unfolding cosmos right above his head.
Wow.
We'll get some good songs out of it anyway, brother.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. So you just got done facilitating this past weekend. I've always been curious how you got connected with the Sons and what called you into leadership.
Yeah, came to the Suns. I was in a new city, no friends, didn't really have much going on. The pandemic had just begun, um, and it was really, I saw these young brothers, and I've always tried to look to the younger generations as leaders in what they're moving with, and I was watching what was going on around me, the culture wars. And so I saw this rainbow tribe gathering up and making the call for lone wolves, and that was me. And I was ready to come into the pack and work within a team. I didn't know that's why I was going at the time, and yeah, just moved into leadership because of this beautiful stage that's been set by the Sacred Sons. This 4-day or 3.5-day window within which we create a metamorphic arc of change, create a liminal time travel space to
Yes.
get to the root of these wounds, these carryings, these hungry ghosts that people are carrying around with them all everywhere they go.
Mm-hmm.
And we root them out and try and fill it with something beautiful. That's why we do things like the Hawthorne ceremony and Kava ceremonies, and the ways that we do things is to fill them up with something, the space that's created once the exorcisms occur. It's hard to call them anything other than sometimes, these great emotional blockages that have been living in people. Um, and the reason why there's so much lightness after a cathartic experience like that is because there's literally more space within the soul, within the human being. And so we have an opportunity to fill it with good food, good stories, good songs, good ways of interacting. Um, and so that's what keeps me in leadership is the creativity and the desire to see something through, which is a question I asked long ago. If I'm honest, I probably asked it when I was a teenager. What has become of man? What's going on? Reading about these pyramids, and now look at this. What's happening? What has become of man? So I have no choice but to be in leadership because I've been asking that same question for so long, and I feel like I have some ideas. Um, we understand now what works, and we're still learning. It's an emergent, unfolding culture, but we're able to come at it with so much more of an informed idea of what a human being is. One, when we're working within the indigenous ideas of kinship, the and also within the advancements in somatic therapies and counseling, the understandings that we have around that now, which the indigenous people always had.
Right. How do you explain somatic healing to people that are new to that phrase and that term? Um, what would you say?
Yeah, so somatics is dealing with the body, is like what people's mind first goes to. For me, a somatic journey is a journey towards wholeness. And that's really what the word somatic means, is there's a wholeness represented. Like that's what like an etheric body is, a wholeness, something that is holding everything together. The planet itself, the tree, right, is a wholeness unto itself, even though it is part of something larger. There are boundaries. And so what is the experience of the human being as a body, and where is wholeness not found? And the body is always a story of that. It can be read. We can learn to read the book, which is the body, which gives a picture of the experience of the human being wearing that body, who's utilizing that body in a lifetime. And how can we approach physicality as a way to approach wholeness? You know, what is missing due to the context of the traumatic experience of life amongst beings in a deep state of amnesia and anesthesia? What are these stories that play out in the body? So, and it can look like a lot of things, and it can look like exercise science. It can look like slow movement. It can look like, for me, using my hands to work with the subtle etheric and astral energies that govern the rhythms of the body. Somatic is a large umbrella, but now more and more it's being thought of as the stories that the body holds and the effects they have on the body. And how do we utilize our experience within a body, as a body, to find wholeness?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a great sampling there. I noticed at Sacred Sons, we don't really use a whole lot of words to explore our feelings outside of check-ins and triads and whatnot. But you have us kind of sitting outside holding poses. One of the ones we do is Blood in the Cup, where we kind of hold our hands together in front of our chest, and different stances. What is the meaning of that work? What effect are you hoping for these practices to reach men with?
Right. So the nines, those are our morning, that's our morning routine. Um, and I mean, it's working on many levels. One, practical level, we get you guys up early. Let's wake up. Let's get the blood running. Let's get warm. Sun might not be hitting us yet. Two, that's an exploration of postures that have a specific consciousness within their archetype, right? So there is a type of thinking and a feeling, and you're referring to blood in the cup. The right palm is in the left hand. Personal space is held, and that becomes a space where the heart can be lifted, right? So many of the men that come to us, their hearts have become heavy with the weight of the world. And so the physical act of lifting the heart into a secure space, can the body now begin to lead us back towards something if we bring it into the position of the consciousness, right?
Mm.
He had to skip to his step, he had rain clouds over his head. Like, all these ways of describing emotions are already, I'm down in the dumps, right? Or I blew my lid. All these things have these bodily connotations, the emotional life. And so can we begin there? And can we also begin to awake up an indigenous aspect of self by moving away from what the world has laid on our shoulders, the slumped shoulders, the leaky pelvic energy? Is there a form that is supportive to the consciousness that we are moving towards as men? What is the human upright? What is it? what does it mean? I'm always ahead of myself. And your head is literally 2 inches in front of your chest. Oh, you
Mm-hmm.
want to be heart led? Start there. Put the heart in front.
Mm.
Very practical things that can shift thinking, shift ways of feeling, and shift capacity for serving. Yep.
So, why is it so important to get men out of their heads at these events and into their bodies? I think you kind of already covered a little bit of that, but can you expand on it?
Yeah, sure. And I don't use that term, getting out of one's head, which is used a lot. I would say we're seeking more to unify the head with the rest of the community,
Mm.
because the head has gone on its own journey. It needs to come home, and it takes a big part of us there, right? And and to use the term, we want to get out of the head in regards of the constant hamster wheel of inner hatred, disapproval, shame, excuses, lack of responsibility,
Mm.
blaming, and so how do we move away from there enough to for a person to remember who they are at the core of themselves and take responsibility for the activities of their head, you know how where else can we listen from, so to
Right.
speak. Mm.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, where one of my biggest struggles was before I found the work was just the trying to get off the hamster wheel. So,
Mhm.
definitely relate to that. In addition to the somatic work you do, you also lead a hawthorn ceremony at the end of the weekend. Can you kind of take us back into the origins of that ceremony and maybe give us some more information on where it came from?
Sure. Yeah, hawthorn ceremony. So really, in this incarnation, it comes from my own grief,
Mm.
my own deep longing for an earth wisdom tradition, something that would have brought me as a boy through the thresholds of understanding, of having identity through my understanding of the natural rhythms around me and the songs that they sing. Right. And so, in my own striving to be in relationship, to re indigenize, to belong somewhere, and to build culture within the relationship and context of the rhythm of life, I came to the Hawthorne way. And for me, it was not about Googling things or trying to recapture my genetic roots, but simply to have a song to sing to stimulate the memory and the inquiries of human beings into the knowings of their heart. And then over time, I came to find out, I knew that it was like good heart medicine, but it's true that I have Celtic blood running through me, and it is a centerpiece of all heart healing within the ancient cultures of the Green Isles. And so what we say is we're here to remember the future. We're here to bring culture that is supportive to the future that we want to see. And so Hawthorne ceremony is from one man's belonging, one man's own orphanhood into the greater conversation of grief and reclamation of the heart as fertile ground for the words of the ancestors and the movement of spirit through us, culturally, practically, and engaging with mystery as we are, which is knowing so very little.
All right. I think we're going to take a pause right there and get a word from our partners, and then we'll be right back with Hunter Toran and the Men's Movement Podcast.
Hey there, this is Riverstone Waldorf, inviting you to attend the Brotherhood of Cascadia Emergence 2, happening July 25th through the 28th in Eugene, Oregon, out in the country. If you are interested in a transformational experience with other men happening this summer, please check out www.jamielightheart.com/BCE 2024. You can also find us on Instagram at Brotherhood of Cascadia, and we hope that you will join us this summer.
All right, we are back with Hunter Toran and the Men's Movement podcast. So you have attended and facilitated men's work all over the world. What is the biggest common denominator that is bringing men to these events and bringing them into circle?
Yeah, I would say the biggest common thread is, again, this question: what has become of man? And a lot of time that's, us talking about what has become of me. Why am I so disoriented in this world? Why why am I so at ill ease with myself in the world? Where is that steady feeling of being rooted and effective in my relationships and um, my ability to connect with life and to tend to life? And it's the grief, man, brother. It's like people outside who have not come to events and see things, and some people are so grateful, and some people are like, oh, this is just a bunch of you know um, peak level event stuff. But we really come into grief in a way that is a common language everywhere that I've been. Grief is the common language that allows the shift to happen within people. And so it is, we often say that we're tear merchants or grief walkers, grief merchants. So that's what we bring. And we bring some celebration, of course, too, but we tend to what is present. We tend to what is immediate in a man's life. And so many are in places of great crisis.
Yeah. Why are men suffering so much today? I mean, I know there's the digital age has us disconnected. Maybe it's the lack of purpose. What do you see from your perspective?
Oh, man. Yeah, what has become of man? I mean, we can look at, all the symptoms, all the aspects of culture that have shaped the arc of story within the development of men. The lone wolf, the savior, right? The hero, and the impossible perfectionism brought down through the Abrahamic distortions of religion. But most of all, is that we are at a monumental shift in the West. And I only speak for the West. I can't speak for the world, And when I go abroad, it's with Western men, Australians, Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, the number one problem is an identity crisis. Is that men have absolutely no idea who they are and what they are capable of when they feel and when they emote and when they come into the artistry of self-expression and come out of survival mode. People need to understand history. They need to understand that up until the 1920s, 85% of the populace was in agriculture. And then there was another great movement of the people with the dust storms, the great dust bowls. And there was another big push west of those who were in poverty. And there was a great panic put on the people in the 1930s with the Depression. And the great panic brought about all the worst aspects of a militarized fatherhood, which came down hard on sons. And in their own desperation, their own inability to provide bread for their families, became rageful and full of liquor spirits and moved with violence that was passed down. And so then there was a great severing in the 60s from any kind of elderhood, and the elderly were not taken care of. And the middle class began to move with power and with sharpness because education was still good. And so then they dumbed that down. Redumbing us down, John Gatton, important book about education. We are on a trajectory where much of this is manufactured. There's that which is old, built out of survival, domination, and colonization. Ruling by power alone. There's that seed. And then there's the desperation of people on the run. My people on the run from Europe. When did the castigation begin? What did the puritanical thinking of the Council of Nicaea and the church put on the people? Where everything was hidden and in secrecy, and anything that was of the earth was deemed evil. And so wicked acts began to creep into the secret lives of powerful men over and over and over again. And so here we are at the basis of that, at the inheritance of that. So it's a long, complex story. And so I say, we're not here to change the world. Let's get that straight right now. Don't get it twisted. We're not here to save the world. We're here to save worlds, to assist in men's lives and to bring effectual change into lives that become the worlds that they keep. Right? This is not a savior complex thing, but merely dealing with what we can deal with, where we can be helpful, where we can see communities begin to bud and grow into the awareness needed to express the masculine in a healthy way, to provide structure and protection.
Yeah, that definitely matches up with the theory that I have about us kind of still dealing with the trauma of World War II and all the effects that it brought down on the families and whatnot. So now that you have a platform where you can raise your voice, what would you like to say to those the men out there that are struggling, that have been a part of that system, that have wounded them? What would you like to say to them?
The very first place is to start with truth. When you begin to speak truth and only truth, your life will begin to shift. And that means hard truths to the people close to you. And know that it's going to take a warrior's heart, and that within you there is one. No matter where you're at, it can be found if you call out for help, for those to sharpen. We say man sharpen man, and it's very important to reach out beyond yourself. You can't do it alone. It's just not a possibility. It needs to be done as a brotherhood within the relationships that we have around us, where we can see good mirrors and find good accountability. But first and foremost, brothers, the world needs you. The world needs you to be at your best, to be shaping the things around you and bringing your influence into the world in a rooted, intuitive, beautiful way by you. It's up to us, brothers.
You live in Seattle, which is the suicide capital of the U.S. The lack of sunshine is a very real thing here in the Northwest. You start stacking the lack of sunshine with a breakup, a mental health issue, and it can become overwhelming to anyone. In a society where 80% of the suicides are men, what can we start doing as brothers to start pulling these men back into the land of the living and get them directed on a path that they want to live?
Yeah, I was, having this conversation with Kale the other day. And it's like, maybe our job is just to lead them to the front door. Seattle, it's a pressure cooker of the misery that's brought about when life is lived in 2 dimensions rather than 3. When life is lived on the screen, when all life energy goes towards shaping the activities of screens. This is not the real world. It's a 2-dimensional world. And so to take away a dimension has a deep, impactful impression on the soul, and it becomes less mobile. It's very important here. And then, you spoke of the PNW and the rain. It's, just important to go outside. And the Salish Sea cures all ills. If you're willing to lower yourself into her frigid waters, she cures all ills. But connection is the key, and it's as simple as that. With guys young in leadership, they're like, they want to be holding councils, they want to be doing things. I'll be like, well, just start by being able to identify lone wolves, guys that are completely contracted into their own experience of loneliness and self. Begin to be able to identify them and go and speak with them. That is a good place to begin in leadership, because connection really is the cure. I don't really have big solutions for Seattle except to send the entire tech industry onto the hillside where they sit 4 days, no water, no food. I don't know that that's going to happen. So with men in general, it's this lack of connection. The American dream has failed in terms of individuality and specialization, where a man is what he earns and is driven by what he earns, and that alone is, a deeply isolating way to live. And then men will begin to compartmentalize because they're supposed to be happy over here, but really they got to find their happiness in this secret dark way over here, their relief, their release. And so worlds become fractured for men. There's not a somatic wholeness, like with so many men, it's like, well, my sexuality is over here, my spirituality is over here. And, and it becomes, my family life's here, my professional life's here. And it becomes all these different worlds with different masks, but all to preserve this story of I am my own rock. I am the individuality that I need to move forward and be abundant and progressive in this life. And so that's what I see over and over again, is there's a self-fracturing so that there isn't an integration of the aspects of life, if that makes sense.
Of course. Yeah, you've actually I'm really glad to have a chance to finally just sit down and pick your brain a little bit, because so much that happens at Sacred Sons and other events just happens so fast, and we only have a few moments to talk or to check in. So it's great to get your perspective on a lot of these events, and it definitely aligns with a lot of things that I've been feeling and maybe not even been able to articulate, and hearing words being put to it is just, it's medicine.
Beautiful.
Well, another aspect of men's work that gets encouraged at these events is having a sacred ritual. Not only that, but a ritual from your ancestors. For me, this was kind of challenging because it brought me back to religion, where I was deeply wounded. I was basically kicked out of my church at age 20, which of course now was a pretty big blessing for me. But back then it just devastated me, and it was the loss of community and so many other things. But there was also, in this pain, I kind of rediscovered my inner child that was trying to develop a relationship with the Creator through prayer and all the rituals that we had back in those days. So when I first left the church, I kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater and just kind of started fresh. But I have since then, after being at some of these events and other things in my life, I've reintegrated prayer back into my life, and having that faith and that trust in a higher power has definitely been healing for that anxious part of my brain, or that hamster wheel we were talking about earlier. What does ritual look like for you, and how would you encourage other men to find theirs?
Yeah, so we use this It's an acronym, order, right? Original remembrance of directions, elements, and rituals as a starting off point, a way to orient within the great belonging or the re-indigenization of self to place. Ritual is to build a bridge between worlds. It's a place to host a question. An altar should be a place to host a question. And this is, how I've really been trying to steer men with prayer. It's like, forget about the names. So many people get to that. Who am I addressing? Well, why don't you ask them? That's a good question. That's a good prayer, right? Ultimately, like a ceremonialist is living a life so that when he comes into ritual, he merely turns himself inside out. And that culture is present through pictures, stories, songs, and the carrying of medicine of various kinds. For me, it's very important that rituals is not the primary identity driver within the marketplace of capitalism, but is a natural expression of your life, right? We're in ritual now because we've been paying attention to what's happening. And now is the time to celebrate. And now is the time to remember certain things and to cultivate the relationships necessary. And, imitation is how children learn, and so it's a good place. If someone wants to learn how to do a ritual, they find a ritual and they want to imitate. But ultimately, something else is being asked of the age, which is to bring forward something that speaks to the particular needs of our communities and our culture. And that's the striving with the Hawthorne ceremony. And so it's structured in that there's 13 rounds, but I never know what will be said or done within those 13 rounds to a large degree, right? Because there needs to be a place of liminal emergence within the act of ritual, and that it's not just a performance, but it is a cooperative relationship with the elemental life around you in the natural world, and to learn from her artistry and to imitate her rather than to imitate other human beings, and to look for what the ancient ones were looking for, not for what they found. Right? These are different ways of approaching ritual and ceremony, but we need ritual to deepen in an enormous way. Everyone.
I agree. Shadow work is another dynamic of the work you do. In fact, when I spoke to you last year, you said when you first met me that I was shadowy as fuck. What does that mean when a man is in his shadow, and how does he begin to bring those aspects of himself into the light?
Yeah. Right. The shadow. Shadowy as fuck. That's pretty rude. I said that. But I think with you, I remember is just you were presenting with an unwillingness to be seen, if that lands in a fair way.
Mm-hmm.
So you were retreating, right, and not quite being like, here I am, here's Halo. And so to a large degree, that is what I see. And then there's the shadow of power, right? That's really what we're talking about, because power demands to be commanded, right? And we all have power, and the directions we command it are either ethically in alignment with the laws of nature or they are not, right? And they get shadowy. Are they for my own? Am I using them for deception, to manipulate? Am I utilizing my power? How am I commanding my power? Is it to bring others into the fold in a way where I have power over them? Is it rooted in deep, unmitigated pain, the way that I power that I command power, right? These are aspects of shadow. What are the motivators behind that which leaves emotional ruin, like rage or disassociation? The things that sever the connection, that leave dark the connection between those that we are in relationship with. That's an expression of shadow. But also for an individual to bring forward their gifts, they're going to have to step into the spotlight to a certain degree. And that doesn't mean that everyone's going to be a big leader and everyone needs to do that, but they're at least going to need to step into the spotlight of their own life, take the stage and the responsibility for the theater of their life as much as possible.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I definitely did not want to be seen at that event. I think that I really felt deep down inside, if people truly saw me and they truly knew me, that I wouldn't be accepted. And I think that's why I was kind of just hiding on the outskirts of things. I've since then, learned a lot more about myself and about the brothers that are in community there. And yeah, I don't have to hide as much. I think after my first Sacred Sons event, the first thing I did is I went home and I numbed out with alcohol just because I'd been present for 4 days straight with all these brothers that wanted to know me and hear my story and be a part of my life. Like the very first thing I did was just go numb out. I was like, okay, enough of this. Let's go ahead and check out for a little bit. And, I have since then really almost lost my desire for alcohol in general. But back then it was definitely something that my shadow was using to keep me in the dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is an extremely open experience for most men to come to events, and it can be hard to come back, and it can also feel like too much. It's integration is really different for all men, and I'm still learning how to best be supportive to so many men, coming from peak integration experiences. But this is really why we encourage men to find their local groups. They're that's the exciting part for me. It's not the brand, it's not the popularity. It's knowing how many small groups of men are popping up across America and worldwide. Men are coming together to have these conversations, to shed some light on what's been haunting them, and begin to look outside themselves for support and to find the depths that are of themselves that will become available when these wounds are addressed. These root wounds, as we call them. You asked about religion a little bit, and I don't know if I was trying to avoid it. Because we get that a lot. Like, even with the language I use, people will be like, "Oh, I was religious. I had to run away from that." With religion, I don't consider religion a spiritual movement for the most part. Religion is a power structure. It's a business. And it is a distortion of the masculine, the ability to create an ethical moral structure without adherence to elemental ancestral understandings and law, like true law, true order. And so, we deal with a lot of people that have been damaged by religion, and where all of a sudden they're like, wow, man, like, I don't know what it was about the way you guys pray, but I felt like I could pray with you, brothers. That's because we're praying the whole time. You just haven't been calling it that. And that's why a lot of time we'll say, this is how we pray after we exercise. Like, to us, the morning warm-ups are prayers. To us, the weeping is prayers. The lifting of a man is prayers. So then when we finally get to something like, say, we're doing a lodge or a hawthorn ceremony and men need to speak, it's closer to the surface now because the entire culture is a prayer. It is representative of a cooperation with the natural fractalizing elements of life. And so it stirs men who have been damaged by religion, which is a power structure and a business, guising itself as a spiritual path. And this is not to say there aren't spiritual people who are also religious, because there's beautiful expressions of all the religions in individual lives and in communities. But we also know the overreaching imposition of puritanical thinking on the minds of human beings renders them disconnected because of the shame that's cultivated through the mechanism of religion. Shame is a great severer of connection. That's why we always say the best way back from shame spirals is gratitude. Like something, it's not silly to make a gratitude list. It's the first rung of the ladder out of shame spirals. What can you find? Where's the gratitude? You still breathing, you still living, you still have terra firma, the first rung out. So religion, and people often, they'll be like, oh, what are you guys, a cult? It's like, no, man, we're a culture, so the word is there. It's just within culture, it's cult plus what you're going to put into it, right? Culture.
Yeah.
Right. What are you offering? Right. Are you only offering criticism, or do you come to lift your voice in a good way? Right. So, and also, if they'd ever been to one of our core leadership meetings, they would definitely know we're not a cult, because that needs the power of just one. we do not have that, but we are a culture, and we do at times, and the masculine, because we missed out on this as boys, or the way that a group mind or a tribal mind came to us was often through violence or sports. It is helpful to trust enough in your leadership to allow the individuality to be loosened a little bit with certain things, with chanting, with body rhythms, coming into a group mind, not because we want you to give us your identity, but to loosen from the identity that has kept the individual locked to stories that no longer serve.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the biggest surprises of the weekend, I think. My first event, when we busted out the medicine ball and started playing games.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the space ball, yeah.
Yeah, space ball. It's a blast.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really important for me to keep play part of the events, we do, very serious ceremony, and we do intense physicality, and it's really important to be able to play and to not compete. And that's another way of breaking down the so-called toxic cultural traits of masculinity that we've inherited. Is it's good to compete. I believe that it's very good to compete, but can you play when it's time to play?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've completely lost track of in my adulthood. So that was a good reminder.
Right. And what does play often become for men is it becomes addiction, right? Play becomes the video games. Play becomes the pornography, the drugs, the alcohol. I'm quote unquote partying. That's like, where play has been replaced with an anesthesia.
Yeah.
Yeah, bro.
Well, I've heard at these events that this is the response from the Me Too movement. The women in our society were saying masculinity has become too toxic, and we are the men saying, I hear you, and let's fix that. Is there such thing as toxic masculinity, or is it the lack of masculinity that is toxic?
Are you trying to get me in trouble now?
Yeah,
no, it's a good question, because I often address it. What happens to water when it doesn't move?
Mm-hmm.
Becomes stagnant, and then it becomes toxic. Right. So to me, toxic masculinity is rooted in the true aspects of masculinity not moving. not being a rhythmic pulse with life in the context of life on earth. And then there's the, that which is made manifest. What by that movement not being there, then of course there's space left over for all the garbage behavior, all the searching for purpose and power outside of oneself, for the manipulation and the continuation replay of hurtful ways, and the domination with their Bible in one hand, right? Come to dominate the whole thing. So is there such thing as toxic masculinity? I think there's toxic humanity. And in terms of the Me Too movement and us, for sure we saw that, but we knew there was a problem. The suicide rates were there. The vets were coming back destroyed. The fathers were missing from people's lives, right? Relationships all around us disintegrating, dissolving. And the Me Too movement did a good job of bringing the most toxic behavior into accountability, which was important. However, where do we motivate from? What do we move with? How do we define things in a way where it gives us a direction? And for me, that's rooted more in the idea of stagnance, because life is movement, and this toxicity is out of not exercising something. It's not so much what has become, it's the precursor to that. It's the primal aspect. Something ceased moving, so it initiated the movement of another thing. If that makes sense to you. It's the stagnant, the lack of understanding of what masculinity even is. Right? Bingo. I've had the privilege of working with some trans men, and a lot of times it's the first question. I'm like, well, what does masculinity mean to you? And it's like, I don't know. It just, some say it just feels right. I'm like, okay, well, let's begin to define that. Let's look at the aspects. What can be nourished? What is masculinity? This illumination, this inner essence, this ability to synthesize our leadership in our acknowledgments, in our ability to utilize the body in a way that brings about the thinking that's helpful, right? To find a route for the intensity, all of that.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear in one of our conversations that you weren't a huge book reader. I don't know if that was just audiobooks in general or if it's books in general, but have you found any information out there that has helped you on your journey or has helped support other men in this process?
Yeah, so from about 2000, I didn't have high-speed internet until I guess about 2010.
Okay.
All right. And so I was living very rural. I had 3 little kids, and I didn't have much money, but I had a library card. And I devoured books for years. We had no TV, there was like a gas station that had some VHS and DVDs, but it was a much different time in my life where entertainment was not as accessible. And I read and I read and I read. And then I began to study somatics, and I continued to read, and I found there was less that I could find to read that interested me. And then I began to feel like knowledge was getting in my way of experiencing spatial dynamics in a way that I wanted to, the movement discipline that I am rooted in. And so I did purposefully stop reading. at a certain point. I have picked up reading again. I mostly like to read stories now. I'm much more interested in the imagination, um, books that people find helpful. You know, I'm not the guy to go to for that, really. I don't believe in the knowledge path like I used to. I think it's very important when human beings are in their 20s and early 30s to acquire a lot of knowledge, but there's a point where knowledge begins to get in the way of truly experiencing life. And we live in an information technology. If books could save the world would be saved. If religion could save the world would be saved, right? What is being cultivated and called on in human beings to know about themselves so that they move with wisdom. And of course, knowledge is a foundation for wisdom. And so, what I recommend to men to read is fucking US history, US foreign policy through the contextual lenses of both sides. Read your Noam Chomsky and read the more conservative takes. Know about your country before you voice any opinions on anything. At least have 150 years of broad perspective about the place you live, and that will actually be helpful, because a person that doesn't know where they're coming from doesn't know where they're going and what they're actually involved in. In terms of pop psychology books and books on somatics, there's tons of wonderful stuff out there, you know, and a lot of important door opening books, you know, for people, which are in the lexicon. But if I'm going to recommend anything, it's read history from broad perspective, from the winner's side, from the loser's side. That sound too much like an old man?
It sounds like good advice. We are the ones we have been waiting for. It's a phrase I hear a lot from you and others at these events. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I've even got the sweatshirt on. Yeah. For me, it's stating that I have found a source of relief for the grief that I've always felt in the coming together of this brotherhood. That I've been waiting for this feeling my whole life, not even knowing it. Right. And it also speaks to the power of numbers. It speaks to the power of coming away from individuality, which is not to throw away one's identity in their own individuality, but to loosen its grip on them and to be part of a we, you know, in a broader sense, in a practical sense. What is the we? Just like, you know, you and the brother there are a we today, right? It's an effectual unit of production and host. So we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And it can be romantic too, you know. Believe me, I love the romance of prophecy. I love the romance of a mystical life, and the idea that there's a destiny, a great calling that we can be part of. And within the you know, our own personal mythology, sometimes that feels like it fits, because we know that when we come together in certain constellations of leadership in the sacred sons, that it could only happen that way because we were working together in the ways that we were. The we was greater than the me in those moments. So we are the ones we've been waiting for. And a lot of it too, it begins to break away from this hero mentality. And, you know, sometimes we say, you know, be the hero long enough to see his death so the golden hearted warrior can arise from his corpse. But there's an aspect of the self that can be shed to allow a we to come forward, to be born or midwifed through our actions. And so that's a little bit of what it means to me. We are the ones that we are waiting for. that we have been waiting for.
Well, I've certainly been waiting for healthy masculine role models and men I can trust in my life, and you have certainly been both of those for me. Thank you so much for your commitment to the men's movement and the medicine you bring to the table. I'm deeply honored to know you and to have spent time with you today. Is there anything else you would like to leave us with today before I release you back into your flow?
No, brother. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been a nice little conversation. I appreciate the good questions. And I would just finish by saying, men, if this stimulated something in you, look around you, see what's happening. There's all kinds of stuff. It's not about a brand. It's about community. It's about the local grassroots level of men coming together and asking this question. What has become of man? What else can we do? How can we do better? How can we support each other in doing it? So that's what I would sign off with. So thanks again, brother. Thanks for having me, Halo.
Well, I'm so grateful for your presence today, Hunter. I would also like to thank our partner, Brotherhood of Cascadia. Be sure and join us for Emergence 2, July 25th through 28th in Eugene, Oregon. And if you need assistance finding men's work in your area, send me an email at mensmovementpodcast@gmail.com, and I will link you up with events near you. Our next episode features Bryce Gill. On August 4th, he is the keeper of the sacred Silly, a cacao ceremonialist, and a facilitator of men's work. Until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.